Welcome back. We now have the foot is set up to leather hard. It isn't really moving, and while the lip is very wet still and easy for me to build on top of. And I'm going to just flip this over and fix that foot and make it a little bit more consistent. And that tool that I'm using is a green scrubby, usually used in kitchens, just a little rectangle of it cut off. And I just kind of drape it over that lip of, well, the foot ring, and I'm going to move that clay. And like I said before, that's the best part about clay, is that it moves. And so I can really shape that and make it look more consistent. And I can come back in then with my sponge and fix that up some more. Now, this would be a great time if I wanted to flute it or change that shape. Maybe we'll do that on the next video with another example. But for now, let's work on this one. I'm gonna need to show you how to put a coil on. So I'm gonna get out my piece of paper again, and I'm gonna wet the lip just a little bit. I'm not slipping and scoring. Now I know that that's something they teach a lot in schools, but if this is wet and this clay is wet, I don't really have to do that. We will do that though. We will get to that eventually, but not at this early stage. The two ways that I like to make coils, one of them is just between my palms. So I roll the clay between my palms until it gets about a ½ inch in diameter, and I let it drop down, and it just kind of continues to snake down, and it's about a ½ inch, I think, in diameter. I can just roll it a little bit more. Another way that I frequently see students use to make coils is they'll start it in their hands just a little bit to kind of rough it out, and then they'll roll it on the table. Now, the important thing about rolling it on the table is spanning your hands out. So you start in the center and then span your hands out. And you kind of have to adjust your pressure. But you can see clearly it's lengthening. And you can also see that I'm not as good at this method as I am at the rolling in my hands. It's just a matter of preference. Okay, now I'm going to take this, and using the palm or the heel of my hand, I'm going to tap this down. And so that it's just a little thinner. It's a little thick yet for me. So it's around the thickness of the lip I'm attaching it to. I'm just going to lift this up so you can see a little bit better. I'm not going to put this directly on top, because I have found when you do that, you trap air between those two sections, and that can be a place that a crack can eventually start. So instead, I'm going to put this down just about 1/8 of an inch from the top on the inside. This is too much clay. And I'm going to pinch it on as I work my way around to meet up here, and then I just rip that off. Now, this is the way that we're going right now. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to tilt this so you can see, is I'm going to push that clay down on the inside. And on the outside, I'm going to pull the clay up. And now if I use too much water, it's going to be really hard to do that. You won't have any friction, so do be careful with your water usage. Now I know it looks a little rough, but if I take my red rib and I simply keep my other hand on the outside, I can move that clay and smooth that completely out again. So on the inside, I used the round side of the rib. On the outside, I'm going to bend the flat side so it matches the shape of the pot, that roundness. And you can go in many different directions with this, but I just like kind of going at a diagonal. Now, if I want the pot to go in, if I want that clay to go in here, I just change the angle of my hand. And then when I put my next coil on, tamp that down again. So the reason I don't use the round coils that I used for 15 years, coil building, before I switched to this method, the reason I made the switch is that I always ended up with some cracks. And since I've been working with this method, I rarely end up with any cracks. The key is to have the clay the same consistency. Do you see how my coil's going on at a bit of an angle, like going inward? And that's what I want, because I want this to kind of go in just a little bit. You're not going to be able to see my thumb. It's a little bit like building a ship inside of a bottle right now. But I am moving the clay down with my thumb on the inside. And on the outside, I'm going to move the clay up. I do want to connect each coil really well. Not to say that I couldn't, if I wanted this as a design feature, to leave one side, but just don't leave both sides like that, or you might end up with a leaker. Now I'm going to use my rib and get that smoothed out, and on the outside I'm going to smooth. And again, I'm not too worried about the lip. We're going to fix the lip in the end, but right now I just need to continue building. Now this pot is starting to look the way I want it to, but it has to set up because it's too wet. If I keep building on top of it, it will fall apart. I guarantee it. It's happened to me a million times. So if I let this set up a bit, it will be better and able to handle more weight later. I am just going to take a damp sponge and just kind of clean that up, but don't over sponge your work. Just cleaning up the spots where I couldn't see. You can see how I kind of disfigured that a little bit, and I just come back in with that rib again and round that back out. It's not a big deal. The great part about pinching and coiling is that you have a lot of control over that clay, and you can screw up, and most of the time, a lot of the time, you can still fix it. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to let this set up again. Now this time, I can let this whole thing set up. This is kind of rehydrated a little bit, but if this were getting really dry down here, I would want to cover up the base while letting that top set up. How long? Again, we would want it to set up, not quite to leather hard this time, but we want it to set up a little bit where it can support some more weight.